Hello, everybody. It's Willow here, founder of Illuminance and creator of the High Sensory Method. And I am delighted to be joining you today live from inside the Illuminance community and also live on YouTube at the same time. This is one of my first experiences doing this, and I am most excited to see how all of this actually will unfold. But today, I'm going to be talking about the conversation that we all need to have as HSPs. The conversation that we should have had when we were children and as young adults. And it's the conversation that I create the space for in all of the facilitation practices that I do in my work with HSPs that I've always done. And it was the conversation that I really needed to have when I was younger. And this conversation is an opportunity for us to be able to engage and experience this high sensory ability that we have to see the world more deeply. So as HSPs, we are very much, what makes us an HSP is the fact that we are processing the world more deeply. We're seeing into the world more deeply. And that is a phenomenon that's within us that we actually very rarely get to talk about and really take ownership of, and that's what causes the problems for us when it comes to feeling at home in ourselves. It's what causes depression for us when we're unable to talk about how we really feel, what really matters to us, and the fact that we feel different. So today, I'm going to be diving into this very conversation.
Illuminance specializes in developing sensory processing sensitivity, a natural high sensory intelligence present in 30% of the population, co-creating with the power of humanity to consciously evolve towards balance.
So a very warm welcome to this episode today, and joined by me, your host, Willow McIntosh. I am delighted to be able to hold this space and to create this container for you to be able to tune into this piece. So what am I talking about by this conversation, and why is it so important for us to do this? Much of the work that I do at Illuminance is based on creating a safe space and container for this conversation. And what happens for us in our experience is that we're trying to fit in most of the time. We're aware from an early age that there is something different about us, and we're often told that in order for us to be successful and in order for us to make life work in the same way that everyone else does, we're told to toe the line and we're told to be a particular person. And what tends to happen is we then shut down this very important relationship that we want to have with ourselves, a part of ourselves that we really want to honor. And that is this part of ourselves that is deep feeling, the part of ourselves that is intuitive, the part of ourselves that is noticing special nuances, the part of ourselves that was noticing how grown-ups were behaving as adults and how we used to get confused by adults that perhaps were not keeping it real, and we used to get confused perhaps when they were not reaching or meeting our expectations as children, because we were seeing a very particular area of life more deeply. And that right there is the part of us that leads to our value. In other words, that is the part of us that makes us different. That is the part of our perception that leads to the revelation of our purpose as HSPs. So what happens is when we're not able to talk about this in later life, we then, or even talk about it when we're younger, what we really needed to happen when we were younger was for someone to sit us down and say, hey, by the way, you're an HSP, you're seeing the world differently, you're feeling the world in a different way, and that is where your value is, that is who you are, and the importance is that you claim that, and that you start to explore and become curious about this part of yourself. But that didn't happen. That very, very rarely happened for us when we were younger. So what then happens is, as we get older, we then repress this ability that we have to see this greater expanded perception. And that then means that we are creating a false version of ourselves that's trying to fit in. And what that then does is we're not actually aware of and in relationship with the truth of our identity. So during the last, it's coming to 8 years now, and all the practice, in my practice and all the sessions that I've done with HSPs during that time, there are these core foundations that we are able to connect with that allows us to have that conversation with ourselves and begins to reveal an experience of the truth of our identity. And what that then does is it opens up this room, if you like, that's within us, where we suddenly are able to claim and suddenly are able to recognize and become conscious of this deeper reality that we've been living in all of our lives. And the great shame is that as adults, as HSP adults, we're just not in connection with that. We're trying to live life in the way that we feel we ought to, rather than experiencing and being in life in the way that we know we want to, and in the way that really matters to us. So once we are consciously aware of these foundations, then we're able to actually experience the state of our true identity. The state of our true identity is a feeling, it's an experience in our hearts, it's an experience of the truth of our nature, rather than a constructed false self that we've created that's very much in our heads. And when people come to me to do this work, the pain of being stuck in our heads as HSPs is exhausting, and it is what causes depression for us, because we are not allowing that energetic truth of our nature to come forward and be expressed, and for us to enjoy that natural part of who we are. If we are denying the truth of who we are, then our souls don't like that. Nature doesn't like that. It protests. And that's what causes us to be in jobs we don't want to be in, or we're in jobs in the way that we don't want to be. In other words, we're not being ourselves. We're not being seen and acknowledged for who we really are. But most importantly, what's happening is we're not able to truly own and talk about the cause in our hearts that really matters. And this is fundamental to our happiness as HSPs, because we are deeply concerned. Concern's not quite the right word. We are deeply connected to the part of life that truly matters to us. And that is a cause in our hearts that is very difficult to ignore. And again, there's protesting in our soul, there's protesting in our experience when we are not honoring and being true to that part of ourselves. And that's what happens in this conversation. So there's a series of questions that I ask during my sessions, and they're asked during my courses, that begins to give us permission to explore in a safe container what these natural parts of who we are. And by considering that there is a part of life that truly matters to us, gives us the opportunity to feel our awareness coming back into our hearts again. We feel this experience of reconnection at the body level. in our hearts. And that begins to reveal this truth of the state of our identity. Because when you think about it, all human beings have a natural competence in a particular area of life that really matters to them. So whether that is building houses, whether it is working to design clothing, whether it is working in the kitchen as a chef, there is a part of life that we're naturally fascinated by. And our natural competence aligns with that area that we care about. And that is how it works for us as HSPs. However, it's working in a slightly different way, because the way that we are processing and seeing the world at a deeper level is actually connected to the area of life that really matters to us. So if we're not giving ourselves permission to own that and to explore that and to consider that throughout all of our lives, when we were younger and when we were observing adults in a particular way, or we were observing how people were interacting at our schools, how our teachers were behaving, there's going to be a series of signals that will help you to understand what this area of life is. And it's not something that we choose, it's something that's downloaded with us. It's a part of our natural blueprint. Just in the way that nature operates in its diversity, we are a part of that greater diversity, and we have a natural blueprint. So when we were younger, there would have been particular circumstances where things would have felt out of balance to us, or there would have been things that we were observing where we could notice the loss or the cost when things weren't done in a particular way. And one of the ways, the easiest way probably to relate to that is very much around the area of truth. Truth for us as high sensory people is, it's a foundational part of our value system. It's very difficult for us to have, what are those conversations called, where, when we're talking about the weather, when it's small talk, it's very difficult for us to have those types of conversations. We need to be able to have a deeper interactive experience when we're talking to others, because that is how we relate to the world. If there is something false that's operating in our experience, then we have a lot of red flags and a lot of internal alarm bells that go off. So this area of truth is actually a very interesting piece to consider when it comes to finding this area of life that deeply matters to you. You will be challenged in that area. Life trains us in the area of life that we are suited, that we are designed to serve in. So whilst there is this cause and this calling to want to be included in the conversation of this cause, to want to make a difference in this area, life is also challenging us in the very same area. And that's what's training us to be of service in that area. But this truth piece is interesting because whether it's well-being, whether it's relationships, whether it's personal development, whatever area it is that you're naturally fascinated by, it needs to be in alignment with the truth of how that functions in the world. And if there's an imbalance in that, that's when you will have noticed that as a child. So let's say, for instance, during your experience of observing your parents, let's say that you, what's the example? Let's say you deeply cared about relationships being authentic in order for love to really come through and to be utilized in the right way to really support a relationship. In other words, you could sense the need for vulnerability in a relationship in order for it to function at a healthy level. That would be very difficult to articulate that as a child. However, you will notice the imbalance if your parents are interacting and they're not being truthful to each other. Your ability will allow you to actually feel and sense the energetic signature between those two people in front of you that will allow you to feel as to whether or not there is an authentic exchange that's happening between them. So if your area of fascination or your area of cause is that in order for the world to function properly, we actually need to be vulnerable about the truth of how we're feeling, then this is the conversation that you need to have. And when you're not allowing yourself to have this conversation, when you're not taking ownership of the importance of this particular area of life for you, that is when life becomes really heavy for us as HSPs. So my example of this was my fascination with human purpose and potential, that we are a part of this greater, awesome structure of energy that is moving through the solar system and that is evolving over time, that is evolving from a conscious awareness point of view. All of that fascinated me as a child. And yet it wasn't really until I was counting back into my mid-30s, is that right? Yes, it would have been in my mid-30s, that I was actually given the opportunity to have the conversation that I really wanted to have. And it's not just saying what I just said, oh, I'm fascinated by human potential and, it matters to me that people are on purpose, that we're actually, that they're living in purpose in order to help this greater ecosystem, this greater, endeavor that life is up to. That's not enough. That's not the conversation that I needed to have. I needed to talk about how much that matters to me and how much I care about humankind and us doing what we can to support it. That is a big part of the conversation. But the other part of the conversation that's so important for us to have, and the conversation that was a breakthrough for me, was to talk about how I experienced that and how my own high sensory intelligence is actually processing the world in a way that's trying to contribute to that cause. And this is the piece. This is the piece that I hope that you feel encouraged to explore in yourself. That piece for me was my relationship with the world around me and how that was actually occurring for me. And what was happening was when I would meet people, I would sense whether or not they were in alignment with the potential within them. So this is the version of truth for me. This truth radar piece that we all have as HSPs in our area of expertise. This is what was functioning in me, is that I would be able to feel when someone was in a place of self-rejection and not being in alignment with their truth. I could feel the disruption to their energy field, but I didn't know when I was younger that that's what was happening. I didn't know that's what I was reading when I was younger. Once someone held the container for me to talk about this, I realized that I had personally been challenged in this area, where I had spent much of my time also out of alignment with my truth. And that was incredibly painful for me, to be in a place or, leading a life that wasn't in alignment with the truth of who I was. And once I was able to become clear about what really mattered to me, about the cause that really mattered to me, and then most importantly, the area of what I call my high sensory intelligence that allows me to read the world in that particular way, that actually allows me to sense and see the movement and flow of energy in the world around me. This has always been my deepest fascination, that I've been so curious about what's happening beyond my day-to-day senses, because that is the part of the world that I am most deeply in relationship with. So then when I'm talking to people and I get the opportunity to facilitate, which has been the predominant part of my career. Much of the time I didn't know I was doing this, in my 20s and coming into my 30s. But what was happening is when I would find myself a lot of the time in consulting roles, almost by default and sometimes by mistake. And what would happen is when I was sitting in front of someone, whatever the endeavor was that they were trying to achieve and that they were asking for my support around, I could feel and sense whether or not they were being true to the underlying purpose and potential of who they were. Once I was able to have this conversation where I linked these pieces together, where I was actually able to be very honest about what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, and the fact that I can sense this movement of flow, and I can sense the movement of flow when I am facilitating someone, and that I'm receiving downloads and I'm receiving guidance that's allowing me to ask the right questions to help that person challenge what's not real in them so they can actually feel and align back in with the truth of the state of their natural identity, the truth of the state of their natural purpose, and the truth of the state of their own cause. So I'd always had this ability, and that's what I was observing when I was a child. I was observing whether someone was being open and vulnerable enough into their own truth and the truth of what they were here to do. I couldn't articulate that as a child, but that's what I was observing. And I was also able to experience this natural flow of movement through life that was happening in the garden where I was growing up, and that was happening through the experience of when I was at school and whatever I was doing. I could feel this, it was almost like a breeze that was blowing through me and flowing through everything. And whether people were actually serving that. And much of the time they weren't, of course, as you know, it takes work for us to be honest about the truth of who we are. But the point that I'm making is that unless we are honest about what we are reading as an HSP, what this ability is to see more deeply into the fabric of life, whatever that may be for you, until we get honest about how that's functioning and what's actually happening, it's difficult for us to be in a place of contentment and peace and meaning. Because that ability to see the world in that way that we are designed to see in the world as HSPs is the natural state of our true identity. That is what nature is hoping, that is inviting us to claim and to be an open channel for, so we can actually do the work for the world in the way that we are intended. And that is how we experience the truth of the state of our natural identity. That's what happens when we bring the four foundations together in the high sensory method, where our conscious awareness, it's almost like a key that gets turned when we are aware of how these four areas are functioning in us, that then allows our awareness to descend into the natural experience of our body and the natural experience of our true identity. So the two are very much linked. In other words, that way in which you're processing more deeply is directly linked with the truth of your identity. It's directly linked with the nature of your purpose and your potential. And if we're not given the opportunity to take ownership of that and to build relationship with it, that's when life is a misery for us as HSPs. Yes, I know that, much of the struggle that we have as HSPs is the fact that we are overwhelmed a lot of the time, that we are we're burning out, that we get more tired than other people, that we feel highly sensitive to the world around us. The depth to which we feel and the emotional reactivity that we have can become overwhelming. And for the uninitiated HSP, if you like, or for the untrained HSP, it feels like that's just a bad joke that nature's playing on us, that we have been given this trait of high sensitivity, you know, as a curse almost. It's like, well, why is that happening to me? And the trouble there is that we are identifying with the challenges of the trait that are actually required. It's needed for us to be at that level of sensitivity in order to be able to read the world at that deeper level in order to serve our purpose. So this is almost like, it's a byproduct, or it's just the way that we're wired in order for that, all of that other side, of the good stuff to work. But if we're only identifying with the challenges of the trait, then we are missing the greater picture of who we really are and what's actually possible. So my invitation very much is to begin to explore this. It's an invitation to get the support that you need to join the Illuminance community, where you can begin to have this conversation, and you can begin to, which is free, you can come in and you can begin to meet other people that are on this journey, on this transition of being in a place of uncertainty, self-rejection, depression in many cases, in order to actually begin to peel away the false guardians, if you like, that we have created around the truth of who we are in order to fit in, or in order to feel safe, that we need to do as a child. As an adult, we need to begin to let those pieces down, to let those guards down. We need to begin to let those pieces go in order for us to open up to this amazing reality of the truth of who we are, to open up to this high sensory intelligence, to be able to have this conversation. And what that then means is we are then walking into this beautiful internal room where all of our gifts are. They're like treasure chests that are currently covered in dust. And as we come into this room and we start to open the curtains in this glorious room in the castle of our high sensory intelligence, the treasure room in the castle of our high sensory intelligence, as the light begins to come in and we blow the dust off these treasure chests, we realize that the more we are engaged in this conversation, especially with other HSPs who see the world like this, the treasure chests start to glow. And as we open them and we embrace the gifts that are within, that are aligned with our purpose, that are aligned with the truth of our identity, and aligned with the cause that deeply matters to us, the more we are able to come home to ourselves, the more we are able to take the little leaps of faith, to take those steps towards embracing the work that we really want to do in the world, to reclaim who we really are in the world, and to allow us to find that sense of meaning, and to recognize the gift of what it means to be an HSP, to recognize the responsibility that we have as an HSP, this higher sensory perception of what we're seeing, in order for us to serve the area that matters to us. We are dearly needed. That perception is dearly needed. And the more that we are in conversation with others who get that, and the more that we're in conversation with ourselves, the more we learn to articulate these gifts and abilities in a way where the rest of the world around us begins to understand it. And we recognize how we can begin to implement these abilities in the way that we are designed to do so. And the more that we practice that, the more that we utilize these treasure chests in our beautiful room in our castle, the more we begin to understand our value. The more we begin to understand our value, the more our natural identity shines, the more serendipity there is in the world, the more we are aligned energetically, the more the law of attraction switches on for us, the more we start to attract wonderful opportunities in our lives, and we start to recognize how wonderful it is to be an HSP. So thank you so much for being here today with me, if you are here live. I hope very much that this is encouraging you and inspiring you to begin to notice these pieces. As you enjoy your time with your families, as you enjoy your time with your friends, my invitation is to notice what you're noticing and to be careful with whom you are talking to about this ability in you. Make sure that you open up the conversation with other HSPs who understand this conversation, which is why very much encourage you to join the Illuminates community purely for the reason where you can talk about this stuff without the fear of judgment, because that fear of judgment is what is holding us back from claiming all of these wonderful parts of who we are. We need to be able to talk about this stuff in an environment where we can truly be seen and acknowledged and heard for the truth of this reality that's within us. And that is what will allow us to strengthen our relationship with it, so then we can bring it out into the world in the way that is most aligned and most comfortable for us. So there we are. Thank you again for being here with me today, and I very much look forward to seeing you next time. And I shall be available, of course, for any conversations and comments in the community underneath this video. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye for now.